Today's episode is part three in our series on the three treasures of Taoism. A call to integrity focuses on the third treasure, humility. Welcome back to Language of the Soul, conversations on healing and growth. I'm Ben Umstead.
And I'm Martin Perkins.
So today we're wrapping up our series focusing on the three treasures of Taoism. We've explored our moment as humans through the lens of compassion, simplicity, and now we're stepping into a place of humility. And what does humility mean? It's a word that I feel we've lost the threads on in our modern, hyper busy world.
So, if you go to the internet and its plethora of dictionaries, you can begin with one definition, which is a modest or low view of one's own importance, humbleness. And as I heard that low view of one's own importance, I both heard something that felt important to the conversation, but also something that was missing from the conversation. This notion that if one is humble, one need have a low view of oneself, at least an aspect of it. In other words, can we be humble and yet at the same time confident, self-assured, self-aware? That definition kind of inherently takes this notion of humbleness or even meekness and almost gives it a denigrating quality as a less than kind of quality, right?
Yeah, I feel that too.
And then another definition that came up that felt a little closer was the quality of being modest or respectful in one's self-assessment and behavior. And I thought, oh, we're getting closer.
That meekness part that you brought up, I think that's fascinated me. And we were talking about this in our preparation for the episode. To be meek, it takes me back to one of the Beatitudes.
Right. The third beatitude is, blessed are the meek, for they shall possess the earth. Not inherit, they shall possess the earth.
Mm.
When I began to work with my own definition of humility from a consciousness perspective, what I came up with is a letting go of the ego's need to define an experience within a framework that is by nature limiting. What makes a framework limiting is defining any experience through the ego's lens exclusively. In other words, if the only thing we're seeing is our ego's need, right? The ego's aspiration, then we're only seeing a very tiny part of any picture.
Yeah, of ourselves, of the world, of anything.
Right, because we're defining it by what we want to have happen, what we want, or we even will insist that we need to happen. So that felt important to unveil that definition and bring that into line with these other definitions we're discussing, or we've discussed, and allow it to kind of wash over us in this experience of, can we let go of defining an experience only through its egoic lens? And if we can, then to some degree, we are embodying that other definition, the second one I shared, which is the quality of being modest or respectful. You know, modesty, respectfulness, by nature, we're considering the other in the conversation. I don't know that it really covers the larger picture, which is, what is our wisdom's input into all this? Does our soul tell us about any given situation, any perspective we might have. So I was recently not well. I went through a case of influenza and really spent the better part of the last 2 weeks really allowing myself to rest, to to feel into this thing called illness, to give myself permission to learn about me from the perspective of being ill, of being not well. Not in some defining sense of, you're not well.
The egoic framework, sure.
Right. But rather, let go into the experience of being me. Not from the perspective that I need to fix this, I need to learn from it so it doesn't happen again, but rather as a way of learning about me, a deeper linkage into that notion of humility. Just me saying out loud as a healing and growth practitioner, for me to acknowledge out loud, excuse me, that I was sick. While it's not something that happens with a lot of frequency in my life, I've been able to really let go into a being with myself through this illness that's been, frankly, extraordinary. Not extraordinary in the sense that there's some great revelation that I can share with others, but more in the true nature of what humility offers, which is I was able to let go of my ego's need to define my illness. I allowed within myself this experience of being not just okay, but really immersive in the experience. And as I did so, no, I didn't feel great because my body was going through something. But there was this feeling inside that while I couldn't really define it, I still don't really have words to even share exactly what the sense of revelation was. But it was something that felt like I learned about me in the midst of my illness. And I feel a sense of gratitude for that. And frankly, how often do we get to be grateful for being sick? This feels very closely rooted in this conversation of humility.
Yeah, I see that and feel that.
This is not to say that I have some defining statement around the notion of illness, other than I do believe or know from within myself that every experience need not be something that we need to fix, that we need to change, that we can let go into that experience, answer any calls that we have that require support from the world around us. I'm not suggesting that there's something that doesn't need care. So, coming back to that definition for humility, a letting go of the ego's need to define an experience within a framework that is by nature limiting. I was able to experience my illness from a perspective of humility. I was able to grow within it. I think I'm still learning what that means, but I've explained it as best I can.
I would offer that, of course, you're still learning what that means, because if you weren't, you would have had an egoic experience. It would have been framed and distilled down into that place of exclusiveness.
Or better yet, another word distilled into that singular answer, that answer that will make me feel good, right? Which is in many ways the human attachment to dogma. It's interesting because we live in this world where dogma in its prior incarnations was very much attached to religion. But now we're living in the age of secular dogmas. And now, instead of an attachment to doctrines and dogmas centered around scriptures, it's largely centered around this need, this attachment to feeling good all the time. The need to feel good all the time. And the call to humility is an inconvenient truth, to borrow upon Al Gore's word usage.
That inconvenient truth there, reflects the uncomfortable nature of going deeper, of getting in touch with our wisdom. Because when we do that, this isn't about eliminating one part of ourself, the ego. It's about a full expression, essentially a non-binary. It's made up of every facet. It's not one or the other. It's not this dual, complementary yet contradictory kind of thing, right? And hearing you talk about being ill and being grateful for that experience, there's this quality of what is it like to be nobody in your body, to be ill, to be a body that is ill, to try to define it within an egoic narrative is so limiting. And the irony there, I think, that's important to mention is usually that just perpetuates the illness. That takes it to the point of where all that worry around getting sick, you've manifested and made true to the point of where that influenza turns into pneumonia and you need more serious care, and it becomes so taxing on your body because of the fear and the worry that you've had around the possibility of it, not even the reality of it. I think where my heart aches at our ego alone, away from so many other wonderful parts of ourselves, often feels and thinks, which is just got to fix it, got to prevent it. So much of life is ignored, is even denied in that way. And so it makes a lot of sense then that illness gets worse. Illness gets more powerful in the body and takes over if we're denying ourselves a true breadth of life, of living.
Really early on, as I was experiencing my letting go into what I was feeling, one of the pieces of the experience that I didn't initially share, but you prompted me to just now, was for the better part of the last 2 weeks, my heart has felt raw, emotionally raw. I'm very quick to tears. I'm very aware of my own sense of vulnerability, the sense of vulnerability as it exists in the world, as I feel as a form of compassion or empathy for the people experiencing any number of different forms of suffering in the world right now. This recognition that as I'm more authentic with myself, as I'm more willing to let go into my own sense of humbleness, my heart has opened to both my own experience, but also the experiences of those around me. It's the world has felt both in a deeply loving way, but also to some degree, given what's happening in the world, at least politically, it has a tragic nature too, right? Because there's so much loss. And some of it, or a lot of it, is unnecessary suffering because of the nature of how things are being done. It's a political question as to define whether or not it is necessary or unnecessary to make any political change, but the harshness with which it's being done, a lack of conscious awareness with which it's being done, it's painful to bear witness how it's being done without a whole lot of conscious awareness and with a great deal of
Well, it's a lack of integrity, right?
it's the lack of integrity.
All of these things that are occurring in so many parts of the world, not just the United States. But I've thought about this recently as it pertains to the United States, and I'm going to speak very broadly because things are moving with such a pace and with such a fury that, by the time we share this episode, more and more will happen. When I've been thinking about this and really thinking about it after I've felt it, right? Really sat with it and felt through it and grieved with it. And like you stated, how raw you were through the illness and just letting those tears come because of the many tragedies and the many paths that have been taken to unnecessary suffering. I've thought about the nature of, specifically in the US, nature of laws, nature of power, and going, well, how can they do XYZ? How can they do all these different things that have been happening where a lot of it does come down to just ignoring the laws and things that are in place? But by a greater measure, regardless of political affiliation in the past, regardless of how somebody used their power or who they used it for, and often ignoring, harming, minority groups in this country, there was still this degree of integrity, even from incredibly cold-hearted, ego-driven people. There was still this etiquette and integrity that was occurring because it was the right thing to do. That's how you operated in these systems, in these political systems. You could be cruel, you could even be downright evil, but there was a degree of, in the discourse, some kind of integrity for the people you were working with and even people that you saw yourself working against. That's not present at all right now in terms of the positions of power. And that's where my heart cracks open every day. And that's where that rawness, because it is very raw at first, right? There is anger there, there's frustration, there's deep sadness. And then I ask myself, okay, what is deeper here? And what I come to again and again really speaks to the experience that you had with the influenza, because that illness reflects the larger state of emotional dis-ease that we're all feeling. And I think we are all feeling, for those of us who have practices in wisdom, energetic meditations, I know I feel it quite immediately. And I know that I don't question it as much as I used to. There still is a question of, where do I put that energy? Where do I put that rawness? What is happening when the heart cracks open? And I keep moving towards this sense of integrity, and I keep asking myself, what does that mean to me? And like you're saying about your experience with being ill, you're still learning from it. That question of integrity that's in my gut and in my heart and on my mind continues to unfold. It has to. That's really truly the only way that the integrity itself grows, the depth of that integrity, the wisdom at my depths, holding that integrity, cradling it, nurturing it, because otherwise it will stagnate. Otherwise it will fall to the wayside. To include it in that holistic self, to be nobody in my body as I ask that question of integrity over and over and over again, and be okay with not being okay, right? This is the thing, being okay with not knowing what it may mean today or what it may mean in the face of such wicked men. This is not being okay. This is feeling uncomfortable, but I'm not collapsing into fear. And I think that's important to state. Feeling that experience ourselves, being authentic and vulnerable with ourselves, it's a beautiful thing. That beauty there, just crying because you need to cry and sharing that, I feel is a path to integrity. It speaks to a deeper kind of integrity, not the surface-based transactional integrity that I spoke of in our past political climates and doctrines, but truly a wisdom-based integrity.
Yeah. As you're speaking, I'm just over and over again reminded of how important it is to be willing to connect our hearts to our wisdom centers, to take the time, the space to be with the feelings that come up. And if we're not really connecting with those feelings, being willing to make the connections. And in that way, humility is really this extraordinarily expansive place, and not as the internet definition would suggest, which is a modest or low view of one's own importance. It's really not about importance at all. It's about being in a truly authentic place in ourselves, so that the way that we connect with the world, our community, the people that matter in our inner circle, can be as heartfelt as possible.
As heartfelt as possible, bringing that compassion, that simplicity through an act of humility, a choice in being humble, because it is a choice.
Yeah, it is a choice.
As Martin and I come to the conclusion of our series on the three treasures, we'll actually be taking all that we talked about here on the podcast and bringing that into our first joint workshop, Building Resilience in a Changing World. That's a free workshop that will be offered over Zoom on March 28th from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern Time. In this workshop, we'll be offering inner practices centered around building resiliency in a world where division and superficiality rule the day. This offering is interactive and practice-based, with a focus on meditation and journaling through the lens of Taoism and its wisdom traditions found in, you guessed it, the Three Treasures. You'll have the opportunity to walk out of the workshop with real and effective tools in navigating the difficulties that arise when our hearts are strained by the lost connection with soulful wisdom within ourselves, as well as in the world around us. So if this series on the podcast has spoken to your soulful wisdom and you'd like to join us, go ahead and check out the upcoming events tab over on martinperkins.com. And as always, if you feel that there are people in your life that this would resonate with, share it with them, share the podcast with them, share the newsletter. In other events, we're coming up on our next movie club, which is Charlie Chaplin's Modern Times. Modern Times sees Chaplin embodying his iconic Little Tramp character for the final time. It's a whirlwind comedy that equally laments and lampoons our hyper-industrialized, busy world. And it was made in 1936, so that says a lot. If you are local to the Northern Virginia, D.C., Maryland area, do consider joining Martin at Simplicity Farm to watch the movie on Sunday, March 2nd, or watch on your own time. Then you can join us via Zoom for a discussion on Thursday, March 6th.